Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and thanks for joining us today, February 20th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Well, today we have a great number of feasts that are very interesting. There's a mention of Vergine del Carmelo in Messagne, in Brindisi, Apulia, Italy. I'm not sure exactly what that feast relates to, but it's Our Lady of Mount Carmel. The Abbot Orsini tells us that they celebrate Our Lady of Boulogne-sur-Mer, Our Lady of Boulogne on the Sea in France. The story is told that in the year 636, a small group of people standing on the seashore witnessed a ship without oars or sails come into the harbor of Boulogne. It finally came to rest in the estuary, seemingly of its own accord. One of the witnesses boarded the boat and confirmed that there was no one on board and that the vessel had no rudders or sails. The ship, however, bore a statue of Our Lady. Taking hold of it to bring it to land, a voice was heard saying, "I choose your city as a place of grace." The citizens welcomed Mary to their city by erecting to her a shrine, which reached the height of its glory in the 12th century. That's pretty impressive that Our Lady would come on a boat with no rudder, oars, or sails and say, "This is the place I want to live." And they also celebrate, and this is a very interesting feast, the Madonna della Scala in Massafra in Taranto, Apulia, Italy. Right? So the Madonna della Scala, which sometimes they translate as Our Lady, Madonna of the Stair, but it also might be of the Ladder, which is probably more accurate, right? So anyways, the story goes that in the first millennium AD, in a very difficult spot to get into in the Valley of Roses, hunters found a wild deer kneeling before a fresco of Madonna and Child, apparently from the crypt of Saint Maria Prisca, an old Saint Mary's, right? Which had collapsed in the earthquake of 324, right? Near a great staircase on the gorge wall, a chapel was built to house the Madonna of the Deer, right? Known as, since the 900s, as the Madonna of the Stair or Ladder, right? The present shrine opened for worship in 1737. A few years later, the residents of Massafra credited Our Lady of the Stair with saving them from an earthquake that devastated the region on February 20th, 1743. And in 1776, the Pope designated her the city's patroness, right? And for that reason, the city holds its festivities in her honor on February 20th, right? Again, despite the great antiquity tradition assigns to the fresco, art historians date it to the 1200s. Okay. So that's what it says in English. That's the English summary. The story is actually much more interesting in the Italian version. So again, the story is pretty much the same. There's two hunters who are hunting this beautiful deer. They try to capture it, but in vain. And they're following it when all of a sudden it stops and kneels before, it's like a dirty wall. So the men clean the wall and they find this image of Our Lady with Child, right? And so then they decide, they just leave the deer, okay, bye, and then they go and try to tell people what they found, right? So they carry it in procession, this image, to the church of the place, right? But what happens? The following day, the image returns to where they had first found it. So they said, okay, well, then we'll just leave it there. So then they built a little church there. And like it said, sometimes it's called Our Lady of the Stair or of the Ladder, right? There's an image that's painted, maybe it looks like maybe from the 1700s, with Our Lady with the Ladder. But there's also deer in the picture, which is kind of cool. There's a kneeling deer and then there's another one. Because another legend says that later, because obviously so she's sometimes called Our Lady of the Deer. On the feast of Our Lady of the Deer, on one occasion, this is what tradition says, two deer, a mother and a daughter deer, went to the church. And this is literally, the Italian says, "La madre appena giunta scoppiava, e le sue carni venivano cotte e date alla migliaia di pellegrini moltiplicandosi miracolosamente." Which literally means the mother deer, as soon as she got there, exploded. And her meat was cooked and used to feed the thousands of pilgrims, and it was miraculously multiplied. Meanwhile, the daughter deer entered into the church and knelt before the icon of Our Lady. So there you go. The only story of a Marian shrine where there are exploding deer that feed people with their explosion. But it's a pretty cool miracle. So that's what we celebrate today in the Marian world on February 20th. For today's reading from the Imitation of Mary by Alexander de Rouville, we continue with Book 2, Life and Virtues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, from the birth of her divine Son Jesus to his death. And today we consider Chapter 28, Virtue is Compatible with Social Life.
Charity alone led Mary and her son to be present at the wedding feast of Cana. Mary would undoubtedly have preferred to stay at home in Nazareth and enjoy the peace and sweetness of contemplation, but she did not want to sadden the newly married couple by refusing their invitation. Virtue, therefore, is not incompatible with the social amenities. Rather, it makes it a duty to observe them, but to do so in a holy way. If, then, you want to imitate Mary in every way, observe how she acted on such an occasion. What restraint in her speech, what modesty in her glances. The prudence that marked her conduct is a lesson in the propriety and reserve that should be practiced even in recreation, which is virtuous and innocent. We must distinguish sharply between the laws of society and the laws of the world. Virtue does not acknowledge the latter except to do battle with them. It respects the former and observes them as far as possible because they are not contrary to God's commandments. To abstain from all amusements would be, in a way, to do wrong to piety, and to give substance to the false charge that virtue makes a man a barbarian. No, true virtue never makes a man unsociable. He can observe the laws of courtesy without being any the less devout. On the contrary, true piety, because of its goal and motivation, can ennoble actions that are in themselves neutral. Piety tells us, do not give yourself wholly to any amusement, however innocent. It is enough for you to be present. To avoid excessive distraction through amusements, try to recall from time to time the presence of God. Behave with the modesty and reserve you would show if Jesus and Mary were there with you. Like the angel who accompanied Tobit, try to act like your friends, as long as they do nothing wrong, but at the same time, again like the angel, have an invisible food that will bring delight to your soul. That's Tobit 12:19. Raise your thoughts to heaven. Think of the indescribable delights the saints enjoy, delights that are the reward for their indifference to earthly delights. Lift up your mind and heart to the Lord, and tell him that not all the pleasures of this world will have the power to make you forget the pure joys his service brings. Not all the pleasures of this world will have the power to make you forget the pure joy his service brings. Tell him that you, with the help of his grace, you will, for the sake of a single glance from his love, gladly sacrifice all that could most please you in this life.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our Marian podcast. As St. John Paul II teaches us, from Mary we learn to love Christ, her Son, the Son of God. Through her intercession, may we grow ever closer to him. We encourage you to share this with a loved one or friend and help spread our devotion to Mary. Thank you, and God bless.